Good afternoon. Welcome to Conversations at Wadley. On this glorious day, it is my pleasure to speak to Father Lawrence Lucas. Father Lucas, thank you for coming this afternoon.
Thank you. It's my pleasure being here also.
For the past several months, we've tried to introduce the brothers and sisters in this community to brothers and sisters such as yourself who could speak to our political, economic, and social concerns as a people. With that in mind, if you please, and if you would, I'd like to begin with a biographical snapshot of your life.
Born and reared in Harlem. In fact, I was born in the old Harlem Hospital. I started off in public school. It's now demolished at PS 39. The family had lived across the street from All Saints Parochial School, and in spite of being Catholics in those days, they were not taking what they called colored folks. So my brothers and I started off in public school. My younger sister's the first to started in All Saints from the first grade and graduated. I graduated from All Saints. I went from PS 39 to St. Mark's on 138th Street, and then from St. Mark's we came down to All Saints when I was in the 6th grade, and I graduated with the highest honors, the only pea in the pot of rice. I then went to what was then called Cathedral College. I was thinking about the priesthood, but it wasn't anything definite. But in those days, the training for the priesthood for the Archdiocese of New York here was 4 years of high school and 2 years of college, and that's why it was called Cathedral College. It was on 86th Street on West End. And after that, if you still continued on, you went to St. Joseph Seminary in Yonkers, where you did the last 2 years of college and then the 4 years professional training after. And I was ordained by Cardinal Spellman in 1959 at St. Patrick's Cathedral. Had a number of assignments. My longest assignment was at Resurrection Church in Harlem on 151st Street. I was pastor there for about 24 years. In between, I had been at several other parishes. When I was first ordained, I was sent to a parish in Croton Falls. I never heard of the place, of course. And my first reaction was this on this planet or where? You know, I'm a Harlemite, you know, and then here in Croton Falls. I didn't stay there too long. I went down to St. Peter's on Barclay Street, and then after that I told Cardinal Spellman that if I had any talents, I'd rather give it to my folks. So I wanted to go to Harlem Parish. Well, of course, the diocese, a lot of folks thought I was crazy because St. Peter's on Barclay Street was a business parish, and first of all, very few newly ordained priests were ever assigned there because it was what the older folks wanted, you know, lots of time off and a lot of extra income from other things that were available in the business parish that you didn't have in the ordinary residential parish. But I still asked out after 2 years, and the folks said, you're crazy, and so forth. So I was. I went to Resurrection for 2 years as junior assistant. Then I went to St. Charles Borromeo on 141st Street as junior, right. And then I took a scholarship. I was offered a scholarship in sociology and broadcasting at Indiana University. So the Cardinal allowed me to go, and so I will spend about 2 years there taking the degree in broadcasting and television. In fact, I produced a program for the NBC affiliate at that time, WFBM, and got in a whole lot of trouble because I took part in the programs, and that was in the 60s, you know, when we started, the late 60s or 70s, when folks were far more awake as to their conditions than now. And of course, many of the Caucasians in particular care for my point of view on things, including the joker who owned both newspapers at that time, who turned out to be Dan Quayle's father.
Oh, okay.
And Dan Quayle, as you know, a bloody idiot who his father didn't care for anything, I said. And then what made it worse was one day in the program, I said by the time his son graduated, he'll have a 6th grader understanding of the female anatomy, because that was all what it was all about. Well, Papa didn't care for that either, you know. So I ran afoul of police in Indiana and Indianapolis, and, you know, a lot of folks, they say the truth shall make you free. but very often gets you a lot of enemies too. But I didn't care. I figured if you're doing God's work, you couldn't care less about those jokers. Then I came back. At that time, to be a pastor, you had to be ordained 25 years. Well, I was only 10 years ordained, but I went to see Cardinal Cook, who was the Cardinal Archbishop at that time, and told him, now look, I'm born and reared in Harlem. I know everything, forgot more than all of these white pastors put together ever knew. I'm not going to be assistant to anybody in Harlem. Well, the Cardinal didn't particularly care the way I put it. I was never accused of being a diplomat. But one of the best pastors that as far as I was concerned in Harlem, Monsignor Joan Walsh, died about 6 months later, and so I was named pastor at Resurrection, and I was the youngest pastor in the archdiocese at that time. And I stayed there for 24 years, and with, as you know, completely active in the community. The idiotic FBI accused me of being the chaplain for the Eastern Seaboard for the Black Panther Party in those days. We introduced, when I was at St. Joseph, the Black Panther breakfast program. Was the first church that took it on, and I had to fight a lot of folks in so doing. But told them I was in charge of it, and if you didn't like it, just don't send your kids. And these were some of the best breakfasts that many of these kids had. And then we had our, as pastor of Resurrection, that included the whole northern area from 145th Street up to the river. And, you know, the big clashes with, at that time, Mayor Koch. He was childish enough or stupid enough to run to the Cardinal. At that time, it was Cardinal O'Connor, who they were very close friends. I sometimes suggested birds of a feather, but, you know, that's not. But in either case, that I called him Crutch. And, you know, this was the kind of stupidity. The mayor of one of the largest cities in the world. I told the Cardinal, no, my dear friend Judge Bruce Wright gave him that name. I simply added Edwina Isabel. Okay. So, you know, Koch loved me from very dearly when they tried to put all of the men's shelter in Harlem because nobody else wanted it. We led the opposition there, and we kept about 1,500 cops tied up for about 3 or 4 weeks, and Koch decided it was losing money, so he changed the plan. Of course, that didn't endear me to the devil and too much. And then when Richard Green, the Board of Education Chancellor, died, and they were looking for a new one, of course, I and my kind of folks group were pushing for Adlai Sanford. And I gave a talk at a big rally in front of the Board of Education and referred to the board where 86% of the inmates of the school system, and I called them that deliberately, were black and Latinos, and it was run by other folks who couldn't care less about them except their paycheck. Well, Koch didn't like that, so he ran to O'Connor and told O'Connor on television, I don't know if you remember those days, here's the mayor of the city getting on television saying, calling me everything but a child of God, and O'Connor ought to fire me, at which I laughed and told O'Connor, why don't you tell him you give him the permission to do it? But at that time, I made sure that I said, don't even think about a transfer now, because you know what that would look like. So O'Connor used his head, and I stayed at Resurrection. I was only there about 18 years at that time, so I stayed another 7 before O'Connor asked me to take a transfer. That's when I said I had to live in Harlem, and I had done a little volunteer work at Rikers Island before, so I told him, you know, I'd be interested, because since most of the inmates by coincidence happen to be black and Latino, I will take a shot at the Department of Correction. So he okayed, and that's where I've been now for the last 10, going on 11 years.
One of the reasons that you're here, and you have to forgive me if I jump around a little bit, when you come back, hopefully we can do this at a more leisurely pace, and because I want those that will see this to see something of your essence. You know, Maya Angelou used to say that we define ourselves in relationship to our heroes and sheroes. And personally, you've been a hero of mine. When I first got off that boat coming to Harlem and saw you at Resurrection, I appreciated your struggle and your ability to articulate the concerns of our people. Apropos what you just said, as a chaplain, and on those occasions that I've been in jail, to visit the jail, I should say.
That's all right. We're all in one way or another.
Precisely. I've noticed, and it's redundant for me to say this, that the majority of the people incarcerated are people who look like you and I. In your capacity as a chaplain in talking to inmates and talking to brothers and sisters, I'm curious as to some of the reasons that you've heard for their being incarcerated, and what lessons can the brothers and sisters that live in the Harlems of the world glean, so that hopefully we can try and avoid some of the vicissitudes that confront us as a people.
One of the things that is really so paramount and clear is the racism that operates in this country and around the world due to this country, and particularly under the relationship of this clown. I remember telling Koch, I'll never live to see a mayor worse than you are and what you've been. And 11 months later, I had to eat crow and call up the slob and say, hey, I take that back, because this clown, namely Rudolph Giuliani, makes you look like an older girl. I meant boy, but I have these slips of tongue sometimes. And because, let me give you some numbers and you get the idea. About anywhere from 85 to 94% of the people being incarcerated now are primarily young Black and Latino males, with a large growing number of women going to jail. 80% of the arrestees now are somewhere related to drugs. And of course, we don't have time to go into it now, but the diabolical Rockefeller drug law, of which anytime other folks want to get over, they usually get over on our backs. I hear some Negroes making a few dollars more than the masses of us, who sometimes give the nonsense, it's not black or white, it's green, see, it's money. Well, of course, that means you're either a fool and totally ignorant of the history of this country, or you've simply caved in. It's always been black, white, and green, namely white making the green on the backs of blacks. And not just slavery pre-Civil War, but the new slavery, of course, is the prison system and the welfare system for poor people, not the welfare system for rich people. So that when you have 80% or better of those being incarcerated now somewhere related to drugs, let me give you a very interesting coincidence. They call it the Department of Justice. I have other names, so you keep your names what you have. But at least according to their numbers, 80% of the drug users in the city of New York, and this is almost the same nationally, are upper middle class working white males. 80% of the drug users in the city of New York are upper middle class working white males. 86% of those arrested for drug use are young Black and Latino males. Now, when you put those figures together, it's quite obvious what's going on. And the brothers in the streets know, for example, that when the police, most of them from out of town anyway, and you know where they come from, when the police make raids, they will make raids in Harlem and Bedside, Brownsville, Lower East Side, and Southeast Bronx and stuff. But you're never going to see raids being made at American Express. You're never going to see raids at Salomon Brothers. You're never going to see raids at CSN. You're never going to see raids in the Hamptons on a weekend. When if they don't shoot you from what you look like trying to get in there, because you know the gates and so forth, you will find some of everybody who's who in this city, from judges on down, chiefs of police on down, doing exactly what the next day they're going to be, some of them sentencing young blacks for far less. Again, so that's one of it. The getting caught up in this drug thing in any way, shape, or form, either using, selling, or so forth. Your career in selling is usually 3 years. And if you're not killed by a rival seller, you're going to find that you're in jail, and that umpteen thousand BMW that you had driving around, these women who will sell their bodies to you for your money, will be driven by some officer from the 32nd or 28th or the 33rd precinct. All your gold, if it's not confiscated, you don't dare wear it in jail, because then it will be confiscated. And a lot of folks, while they're making it, thinking that this is the way it is, I'm the greatest thing since I got 10 gals a night waiting, and look at my car with the gold trimming and so forth. They're just the patsies. You see, this country, the drug business in this country is almost $500 billion a year. Now, you could take every street level drug dealer around the country, put their money together, and it won't come up to 2% of that 500 billion. Where is it going? It's going to some of the people in the highest echelons of government. I mean, you know, you had a clown, Oliver North, who admitted sending tons of drugs into the country. He never spent a second in jail for drugs. He spent a little time, and he's now a hero, part of the Bush administration. I don't have to tell you about George Bush's children ship off the old block, you know. The kind of things that these folks are simply the patsies, where the so-called war on drugs is the greatest buffoonery pulled on the American people. I'm under the impression that it's rather difficult to underestimate the lack of intelligence of the American public. They have been totally victimized by the lies told by their government, either directly or through the government and corporate media, which we call the free press, which is a joke, never was, and certainly not, even less so now. And because our folks are so into the idiot boxes or the televisions, you know, they're able to even create leaders for us in our communities. And the folks our young folks ought to be known because they ought to be out there involved themselves. They don't know. All they know are the clowns and the clownesses that they see on television all the time. And they never stop to think, why would the oppressor who owns and runs this will show every time this person or that person breaks wind, but a whole lot of other folks we never hear of. And they never stop to think. Maybe it's because the people you see so much in the limelight are themselves owned. Exactly. So the greatest thing in the jail, this is a roundabout way of dealing with your question, is the drugs. You have a lot of folks, especially, remember, and that's another topic we ought to deal with, the prison industrial complex, which is a business. Building prisons, incarcerating people is a business, of which some get very rich and a lot of folks make a very decent living. Now, the whole privatization of prisons, which which Rudolph Giuliani loved so much but couldn't do it. There's a slip, pardon me, which he loved so much but couldn't do it. You see, all of that is a business. And when you talk about a business, if you're going to build jails, notice where the jails are being built. 50 years ago, in all of these upstate counties, folks didn't want jails because they did not want to be a part of the expression, niggers or spics in their area. See? And then when accelerated by Ronald the idiot Reagan, see, and they called it by a nice name. Everything this country does, you call it by a nice name. You know, fighting for freedom, fighting for democracy. Government deregulation was Reagan's term. See, deregulate. We want government off your back. Well, what that really did was to allow the big farmers to come in, gobble up all the mama papa farms of which these folks in these upstate counties were living and making a decent living on. But they were run off the farms because the big farmers brought in machinery and so forth and so on. They didn't need these folks. And all these folks were out of jobs. What happened? You had former Governor Mario Cuomo of unhappy memory. What was his big boast in his last campaign, which he lost to this potato head? Well, his big boast was he built 23 prisons. He never said, I built a school, a college, because he didn't. He never said, I built some housing that low-income working people could afford, because he didn't. He built prisons. And where were they? All up in those counties where they didn't want them before. And what happens? The prisons now become the economic and the political base for these folks, many of them who couldn't spell their own names. But you go up and visit your relatives or friends in some of these way up state prisons. You're going to meet officers who you don't know where they came from. They can't speak, they can't write, can't talk. They were just farmers. And how are they living now? Off the incarceration of young blacks. 7 areas in this city provide better than 80% of the inmates in the state prison system. Harlem, Bed-Stuy, Brownsville, Southeast Jamaica, the Lower East Side, and the Southeast Bronx. When you take those communities together, you have 80% of the inmates in the prison system, meaning that the financial basis of those folks up there, just like those towns which are built around universities, we now have towns built around prisons. And where do the bodies come from? It's also political gambit. you wouldn't believe this. Many people wouldn't believe this. But when it comes to census, which is the basis of federal income in many ways coming into areas, the inmates in these prisons are counted as part of the population.
I, I have a question as you continue. This is just a colon as I ask you this question. When I hear you and I listen to you, and I realize that you bring controversy with you, I'm always puzzled and pleased when I see brothers and sisters such as yourself who have the intellectual gifts and you're discriminating thinkers to the point where you can, as they say, separate the wheat from the chaff. I'm curious as to what was there in your life which made you the kind of person that you are, as opposed to someone who could be a handkerchief head. And I think it's important because, again, the reason that you're here and the reason that Ms. Collins, who is the architect of this program, the reason that we're trying to do this is to let our young brothers and sisters, those brothers and sisters who are manning the cameras this afternoon, see persons such as yourself. So I'm curious, you could have been another handkerchief head. Why is it that you didn't follow that route?
All the institutions, including the Catholic Church, are great in promoting handkerchief heads and to pretend that these folks represent you. Most of them don't, including, I hate to say it, most of our black bishops. What happened to me? My father died when I was 5. And like most black men in this country, whether we admit it or not, we wouldn't be here if it weren't for a black woman that we call Mom. My mom was a Jamaican. She was, as they used to say in those days, a born Catholic. That is, she was baptized Catholic in Jamaica. But she always had a brain. She became a Garveyite. Okay. Now, the young folks don't even know who Marcus Garvey is. I hope these folks know. My mom was a Garveyite, and also we had to read. See, we were blessed in those days. We didn't have the idiot box. We didn't have television. We had radio where they had to produce programs with a little bit of intelligence because they had to stimulate you to, rather than the junk that you see on television today and the nonsense on most radio. We had to read, and we had to be family. For example, there were 3 days a week that no matter whether it was my oldest brothers, whoever it was, you had to be home for dinner. See? And there was no, you take your plate and go in that room and turn on your television, and you go in the other room and turn on your television, the way I go into homes today and see, is this a family meal? Everybody's scattered all, oh no. You came home and you sat around the table and we discussed things. I remember later on, I ran into 2 priests. They were Caucasian priests. There were hardly any black. In fact, I'm the 3rd black to be ordained for this Archdiocese of New York, believe it or not. At this particular stage, I'm the senior black priest in the Archdiocese of New York. You will know it because the white folks and the Negroes leave me out of most of their stuff, which I could understand because I don't sound like that. But in either case, these 2 white priests, and then I remember when I was about 3rd year in college, and that was about the year when I made up my mind I would definitely go on. Well, I was home on a holiday. I think it was either during the Christmas, or as they call it Christmas, or they call it Easter. I call it the Resurrection holiday. During those days, when you were in the seminary, you wore a black suit, white shirt, and black tie. And I happened to have been walking down, in those days it was called Lenox Avenue. I'm so happy of the name Malcolm X Boulevard now. And I ran into this character who looked at me, obviously looked as if I was going to school, and he said, what are you doing? I said, I'm going to school. He said, I could see that. He said, what are you studying? Well, in those days, you were black and you said you're studying to be a Roman Catholic priest. Everybody get down on the ground and kiss your feet. That was, in this white institution, that was. I said, I'm studying to be a Roman Catholic priest. He put his hand on the side and said, you must be out of your goddamn mind. The brother was Malcolm.
Okay. All right. Okay.
Anybody who would talk to me like that, I had to say, okay.
So why did he dissuade you, though? You obviously
we got in conversations rather than dissuade between himself In the early days, you remember? No, you're a little too young. But do you remember Masur Bookstore? At least you heard about it.
Right, I heard about it.
Masur Bookstore, which was the university in Harlem. We had folks every day there on weekends, from Carlos Cook, Dr. Ben,
Okay.
John Henry
Okay.
Clark, Alambe Brath,
Okay.
and it was like a real university. I was introduced to books which I couldn't find in my seminary library. I had to go out to get them.
Okay.
Then you had a little later on Liberation Bookstore on 131st
Okay.
Street.
Una Malzac.
Una and her
Right.
sister. And so with those, if they ever knew this was happening, I would have been dumped out the seminary rather
Okay.
than being ordained on top of the class. Because, I wasn't stupid enough. I knew to give them the answers they were looking for, but I knew what the real answers were too.
Okay.
But once I was ordained, they were stuck. It was like marriage. It's difficult to get a divorce. So the kinds of things that we did, you remember at Resurrection,
Right.
when I first got there, I knew that most, I call them colored Catholics, have been so totally brainwashed that some of them began to object to my sermons. Some of
Okay.
them moved out, went to St. Thomas Parish. Before I left Resurrection, on the other hand, many of them who were still alive came back, because by that time Resurrection was known all over, not all over the city, all over the country, because we were the meeting place for the December 12th movement,
Right,
of which I
right.
was one of the founders of that.
We had Roger Warren.
Roger Warren.
was here.
Right,
He
right.
sat in that same
That's
in
right.
this room.
I remember when Roger them were incarcerated,
Viola,
Viola
Plummer. Right,
Viola
exactly.
Plummer, the whole Coltrane Shimaranga, Sonny Carson,
right, exactly,
the
exactly.
whole shebang,
Exactly.
Well, that upset a whole lot of folks, but I was a pastor,
Okay.
and what you going to do about it?
Okay.
And then we had this unfortunate internal hurricane. Now, an internal hurricane for the young folks is a hurricane that happens inside a building and nowhere else. So inside the church building, we had this internal hurricane, and all of those phony white crackers fell over and got destroyed.
Okay.
It was unfortunate, of course. So we announced that to the parishioners, and had the custodians clean up the place. So we only ended up with 2 statues. One of my former students was an artist and sculptor. She created the statue of Jesus and Mary looking like what they looked like, African people.
Exactly.
Well, that turned some. The church needed a paint job, and it was just by coincidence. The motif was red, black, and green.
Okay.
A whole
Okay.
lot of folks ran downtown, to Cardinal Cook, but he was
So-
smart enough to, leave hands off.
Okay.
And then, of course, in the hurricane, the American flag got destroyed, and we didn't have enough money to buy a new one, and the papal flag got lost, so the only flag in the church was the red, black, and green. And but it was not just symbolism. Folks were made to understand the realities of what was happening. I taught the whole religion department because I didn't want people memorizing Baltimore catechisms and spewing out answers that they memorized and have a clue. No, our religion was based on the scriptures, but you had to see the connection with everyday life. So, for example, when Bill Kunstler of Happy Memory was alive, our 7th and 8th grade, 2 days a week in their religion course, they went to the court during the trial of, at that time, Larry Davis, Adam Abdul Hakim,
Exactly.
and 15-20 minutes before the trial would begin, Bill Kunstler will explain to the class exactly where we are, what may happen, and so forth and so on. It was very interesting that when Larry was incarcerated in Rikers before he went upstate, it was in one of my jails. So I made sure that Larry was taken care of. He wasn't brutalized or anything. When his mother died, I did the funeral. But these are the kinds of they were involved in things. And some folks called it politics, your sermons of politics. And I said, well, that's because through ignorance. I said, read in the Old Testament, Hosea, Amos, and those prophets, Isaiah, Elisha, and tell me whether it was politics. No, if you're talking politics, then you're dealing with their understanding, their principles, and their goals. There's a difference between preaching politics and bringing the Word of God to the context of everything and anything that affects human lives. And if you all can't find that distinction, well, then you got a problem. That's what I have with so many of our preachers today. You know, so many of them are out there waving the flag too. You know, I got in trouble. I said mass down at the morgue one day. I wasn't asked back. I simply was fortunate that it was the scriptural readings for the mass at that time was from the prophet Jonas. And if you remember the story that God told Jonas that the people of Nineveh were doing everything wrong and he was going to destroy the city. And you go and tell the people that. Well, Jonas did not want to give bad news, you know. So what Jonas did was to try to run and hide. Ran in a ship, but when they came up, they tossed lots or shoot the dice and realized it was Jonas' the problem. They threw him in. He was swallowed up by a whale and spewed out on the land. Jonas went to Nineveh. And when he gave them the message, they didn't act like the United States. See? When he gave them the message, everybody from the king down said, yes, let's look at who we are, what we were about, what our policies are. And we must change. And the city was saved. We live in a much different world. I told them, well, you know, it's easy to some idiot to jump up and say we want bin Laden dead or alive, even though there's no evidence whatsoever he did anything yet. It's easy to say we're going to bomb, but Jonas, the prophet, is saying, hey, wait a minute. Maybe we could explain a whole lot about terrorism if we looked at the United States foreign policy, because most of the terrorism today seems to be coming out of 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and Tel Aviv. Well, you know, folks didn't like that too much. But it's the truth. Why is this country hated around the world? You know, we have our politicians and some crazy-ass preachers talking about they're jealous of our prosperity. Well, the prosperity of the United States has always been based on the backs of other folks. Genocide of the indigenous people over here, and they're still telling their kids in school about this idiot discovered a country where people were on the shore waving at him when he arrived, and he didn't even arrive on these shores anyway, you know. And they still, one of the largest clerical and lay organizations in the Catholic Church is named the Knights of Columbus, after a crook, a murderer, an enslaver, and a rapist. And they couldn't find a better name than to take the Knights of Columbus. And you say, where are your heads? You really couldn't care less. So it's no wonder, just recently, Bishop Myers, who's the new bishop from Newark, New Jersey, poor choice, in either case, succeeded Bishop McCarrick, who was now made bishop in Washington, D.C. You know, they were all friends of Idiot George. I mean, of President George Bush. Sorry about that. That's not a slip of the tongue. But be that as it may, when Egan was in Rome, Cardinal Egan, pardon me, was in Rome, and they had a memorial service at the cathedral, Bishop Myers gave the sermon, and in the sermon, he prayed for the safe return of our boys who are dropping the bombs. Not the folks who were being bombed, you see, but for those who were dropping the bombs. And you say, what kind of theology did he learn? You know, but he's a bishop, so far be it from me to criticize a holy bishop. But pray for the boys. And so our folks have to not be totally brainwashed by the media. We have to study history. We have to, and then look at the present realities, and we have to have other sources of information rather than corporate and governmental media. And once we begin to do that, I mean, a whole lot of folks are walking around. I see in the black, thank God not that many, but I see in the black community folks waving flags on their cars. You got to be an idiot. You know, why are you waving the flag representing a country that has nothing use for you here or abroad? You know, one of these days we ought to go into the Clinton presidency and look at what he did. He did more harm to black folks than old man George Bush did. And yet, so you have a whole lot of Negroes, some kissing butt for their own political agenda, but a whole lot of Negroes running around saying what a great president he was for black folks.
I'd like to ditto much of what you're saying. And as you continue, I want to see if we can distill some of this so that hopefully it will be palpable to those who will see this program and hopefully have a chance to talk to you. As I listen to you, one of the things that you've mentioned with respect to trying to have our young people to see clearly that they need to do is to read and to study history and to be a discriminating thinker, not to just imbibe what this country says to you in all of its manifestations, whatever media one happens to be enmeshed in. So I concur with that. So we need to study history. They need to study history. They need to remove themselves from some of this technology. Are there any other very practical things that we can say to them? Because it's a daunting task to try and get these young brothers and sisters to see things clearly. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you, for example, you're being a prison chaplain. I see a lot of young brothers and sisters who wear jeans and pants and they're hanging off their butts. You know, I can see their derrieres. I can see the crack of their behinds. Yeah. And I try and engage them in a conversation to say, yo, you know, that might be a style, but have you thought about where that comes from? Would it be accurate to say that much of that style or that mindset perhaps comes out of that environment in which you work?
Yeah, but a lot of it, the folks who are in the prison environment, they come from the streets, and you see this all over the streets. Now, I have the opportunity, for example, when they come to Mass, those who are Catholics, but I do a lot of classes, not necessarily what some folks would call religion. And you don't come in dressed like that, you see. And you don't come in thinking it's chic to refer to each other the way the oppressor called you. Okay. I mean, you would think that the only words that these folks ever heard was nigger.
Exactly.
Now, the Latinos in jail are not calling each other spics.
Exactly.
In fact, they're using freely the word niggers, too.
I had an argument with someone, in fact, a number of people, for that precise reason.
Yeah.
And even that B word.
Yeah,
there was
exactly.
a sister who got upset with me because I said, no, you cannot refer to, and she thought it was copacetic.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm sorry.
No, well, that's very true. Some of them think that's culture. See, that's not culture, that's idiocy. If the only thing you could think about by calling each other is a name, a derogatory name that your enemy gave to you, you got to be sick. You know, you're totally brainwashed. Again, the style of dress, it's absolutely insane. But again, you know, I will stop a brother and say, yeah, before you come into class, get dressed. And I get no flack. You know, they know exactly what I'm talking about. And I say, this is even stupid. Even in your profession, if you're a mugger, you're going to run in those things? Or with your shoes or your sneakers untied? You know, before you get a half a block away, you're going to fall on your face. It doesn't make any sense, you know. But unfortunately, there are a lot of folks who are beguiled by style. You know, I love these folks walking around as human billboards. Heflinger, you know. Why in God's name would some black person be wearing some idiot's name on your clothing, advertising that clothing when you already got screwed because you paid for it 10 times what it's worth anyway? You know, these so-called Air Jordan sneakers. There's a brother, one of the greatest I've ever seen on the basketball court, but a total idiot off the court. You know, have no social consciousness whatsoever. And here they are. These sneakers are being made on the backs of child labor in Indonesia, for example, and those places like that, costing about $8 to make, including the material and the labor, when you consider what they're paying these folks, 16 cents of slave labor an hour and less. And then they bring them over here, and these fools are running in the stores buying them for $110, thinking, oh, at my shop, I just got my latest, you know, and all that foolishness. Everybody got to wear designer's clothes. Well, I don't know anything that was made without being designed by somebody. But, you know, I got to have Jordache on my ass, you know, on my, you know, and on all this kind of stupidity. You know, when we were growing up, we went to the Army Navy store or Models and got, and they wore much better than the crap they're paying $110 for.
You know,
we have to also how to analyze with a critical mind.
Okay.
Don't just take what people say. Look at what people say. Look at what you're being fed in the media.
Okay.
Look at and you know, you don't have to challenge everybody, but you got a mind.
Right.
You know, I may, well, in his case, I was going to give an example. I may sit down and listen, listen to your mayor talking crap. Well, at my stage now, I'd say it's crap, so it won't be in any room where I am. But, for those who have to look out, but think about what they're saying. Think about what they're telling you. You remember during the Vietnam War? The newspapers and all of your politicians told you why we were kicking their butt. In the first place, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And secondly, it had nothing to do with democracy. It had to do that this country did not want a socialist government in that part of the world. And so this country, the imperial bullies, believe that we can put up governments wherever we want. We could control somebody else's oil and do whatever we want because we're the United States. We got more weapons of destruction than you have. And then they talk about the younger folks, shooting up each other and so forth, simply following the example you set. And nobody wants to look at that, The only answer, when is the United States, in terms of problems, talk about diplomatic answers or sitting down and, no, we got bombs, we got biological weapons. This whole business about Antrax, where was it made? Where is the only chemical that is now used in order to spread this around made? See, and folks are not asked, how did these countries get it? How many folks still in my community, young folks, realize that this demon, as this country portrays him, bin Laden, was financed, trained, and was a hero for the United States when they were fighting the Russians in Afghanistan. See, this is a creation of the United States. He suddenly got into his senses and realized what the United States is all about. And now he's the biggest devil in the world. Not George Bush, but he is.
Oftentimes when one tries to lay out the landscape that we tread as black men and black women, and we see our children treading the same landscape with all of the minefields and all of the challenges and adversity that we know befalls them. It's really frustrating to try and come up with some kind of a cogent and unified way to thwart and indeed destroy those who would destroy us.
Exactly. It's so complex. It's not going to be one way. There are going to be a whole lot of eggs in a basket. One of them is through the political arena, but I don't put too much stock in that. Because if you're black, particularly Latino, or even if you're white these days, and you want to make it politically, you got to sell your soul to the devil before you get in. And your own, and take a look at the behavior of our black politicians. How many of them have you heard since 9/11 have come out and said, maybe we ought to look at the policy of the United States, its foreign and internal policies? They're not about ready to say that because certain people whose butts they got to kiss, how many of them are going to talk about, even the preacher, I remember going to Israel and talking about how they have known terrorism. They sure have. The Israeli government has been slaughtering Palestinians for the last 30, 40 years. Anytime a Palestinian goes in and blow up a place, I'm not saying you should do this. You hear about terrorists. Meantime, the Israelis are wiping out whole towns and villages to build settlements. They call it settlements. They're dive bombing people who they claim to be leaders in the Palestinians from helicopters in the air and bombing their cars. But that's all right. See, this country, as long as the right people do it to the right people, it's all right. You could fire 41 shots at a guy who doesn't even have a penknife on him. And well, it's a tragic mistake, and mistakes can be mistakes, but all the mistakes seems to be made one way. You see, and of course that's just a coincidence, And here's a joker, who has been dumping on poor people in this city for 7.5 years. Black and Latinos don't exist. He doesn't even talk to a black borough president until most recently. And then all of a sudden, since September 11th, because he didn't run downtown and pee on the destruction, but jumped up and played nice on television, which any mayor would have done. We hear he's not only a hero in the city, he's a national hero, and some jackasses were talking about extending his term. Well, we know he has no respect for law, or the Constitution, or the city charter. But a whole lot, the only one who has guts enough to stand up and say, no, not on my term, was Freddie Ferrer.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Father Lucas, the tyranny of time tells me that we have to bring this to a conclusion. I'm going to hold you to your promise that you would return when we can do this in a more leisurely kind of a way and we'll have more time. And I mean this sincerely when I say that I thank you for coming today, and I thank you for allowing me the privilege to sit across from you and to talk to you, because it's important for our young people to hear a voice such as yours. It might be an uncomfortable voice for some people, but it needs to be heard. They need to see brothers and sisters who are willing to take a stand and to take a principled stand. Having said that, again, I thank you. And in conclusion, is there anything you would like to say to the young brothers and sisters who will see this program?
Yeah, brothers, for the love of yourself, don't call a sister a bitch. You wouldn't call your mother, you wouldn't call your sister. Don't call a black woman a bitch. And sisters and brothers, this may seem very simple to you, but it's also reflection of what's deep. Do not use the N-word in regard to each other. If you could begin getting that kind of consciousness of respect for self and respect for your brothers and sisters, you're going to come a long way in doing what we have to do to get this monkey of white supremacy, which is what racism is, of white supremacy, where a minority of people in the world, and a growing minority in this country, and that's what the struggle is all about, continue to control the resources and the lives of people. You're not going to be ready to fight against that unless you begin to develop some self-respect. And walking around calling sisters bitches may get some folks some money from the white folks who run the Hollywood and the rap business, etc. But it's not going to help the vast majority of us. And if you could get away from that word, every time you feel like using it, ask yourself, what respect does this show for me or my brothers and sisters? You're going to be coming a long way.
Thank you, Father
Thanks
Lucas.
a million for the opportunity of being here, and I'm a man of my word. I promise, if invited, I'll be back.
Thank you.